I'm Victoria, 29 years old, and last Thanksgiving my father stood up at our family dinner and announced he was selling our century-old family construction business to strangers, declaring that none of his children were worthy of inheriting what 4 generations had built. What he didn't know was that I had been secretly buying up the company's outstanding debts for months, and I owned enough leverage to block any sale he tried to make. When I revealed at Christmas dinner that I now controlled the business he thought he could give away to spite us, the look of absolute shock on his face was worth every penny I'd spent to outmaneuver him. Before we dive into this absolutely incredible story of family business betrayal and the perfect revenge that followed, I need your predictions. What do you think happened when my dad realized his daughter had completely outplayed his spiteful plan? How do you think the family reacted when they learned I'd been secretly positioning myself to save our legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments and smash that like button because this story shows exactly what happens when parents underestimate their children's business skills. Subscribe because the way this corporate family drama unfolded is pure genius. The Morrison Construction Company had been the foundation of our family's identity and prosperity for over a century. Founded in 1923 by my great-grandfather Thomas Morrison, the business had survived the Great Depression, multiple economic recessions, and countless industry changes while maintaining its reputation as one of the most reliable commercial construction firms in the tri-state area. My great-grandfather had built the company on principles of quality craftsmanship, fair dealing, and family values that created a legacy extending far beyond financial success. The business employed over 200 people, many from families who had worked for Morrison Construction for multiple generations. We weren't just a company, we were a community institution that had built schools, hospitals, office buildings, and civic structures that defined our region's landscape. My grandfather Robert had expanded the business during the post-war boom, establishing the company's reputation for large-scale commercial projects while maintaining the personal touch and integrity that had always characterized Morrison Construction. Under his leadership, the company had grown from a small local contractor to a respected regional firm with projects spanning 3 states. My father, David Morrison, had inherited the business in the 1980s and had successfully navigated the company through technological changes, environmental regulations, and shifts in the construction industry that had eliminated many of his competitors. For 40 years, he had been the face of Morrison Construction, building on his father's and grandfather's legacy while adapting to modern business realities. But somewhere along the way, Dad had developed ideas about succession and family worthiness that diverged dramatically from the inclusive, supportive approach his predecessors had taken toward involving the next generation in the family business. My 2 brothers and I had all grown up expecting to eventually join Morrison Construction in some capacity, continuing the family tradition while bringing our own skills and perspectives to the business. Michael, my older brother, had earned his MBA and spent several years working for other construction companies to gain experience before joining Morrison. Daniel, my younger brother, had gotten his engineering degree and worked on major infrastructure projects to develop the technical expertise that would be valuable for the company's future. I had taken a different path, earning degrees in both business and law, then working for several years at a corporate law firm specializing in construction industry contracts, regulations, and mergers. My goal had been to develop the legal and financial expertise that would help Morrison Construction navigate increasingly complex business environments while protecting the family's interests and legacy. All 3 of us had invested years of our lives preparing to contribute meaningfully to the family business, making career choices and educational investments based on our assumption that we would eventually have roles in continuing what our great-grandfather had started. But Dad had become increasingly critical and dismissive of our qualifications, contributions, and commitment to the family business. Despite our education, experience, and demonstrated competence in our respective fields, he seemed to view us as entitled children who expected to inherit success without earning it. His attitude toward our involvement in the business had grown more hostile over the past few years, with frequent comments about proving ourselves and earning our place that suggested he had fundamental doubts about our worthiness to carry on the family legacy. The tension had been building for months before Thanksgiving, with Dad making increasingly negative comments about the younger generation's work ethic and assumptions about inheritance that seemed directed at undermining our expectations about our future roles in Morrison Construction. He had been meeting privately with financial advisors, business brokers, and attorneys without including any family members in discussions about the company's future direction. When we asked about succession planning or long-term strategic decisions, he would dismiss our questions as premature or not our concern while making it clear that he viewed himself as the sole decision-maker regarding Morrison Construction's fate. The exclusion from business planning was particularly painful because all three of us had valuable expertise that could benefit the company's operations and strategic development. Michael's MBA and construction industry experience made him qualified to handle operational management and business development. Daniel's engineering background equipped him to lead technical innovation and project development. My legal and financial training positioned me to handle contracts, regulatory compliance, and corporate strategy. But instead of recognizing and utilizing our complementary skills, Dad seemed determined to maintain complete control over every aspect of the business while simultaneously expressing dissatisfaction with our perceived shortcomings as potential successors. The dynamic was creating tension throughout the entire extended family, with relatives, employees, and business associates beginning to notice Dad's exclusion of his children from company discussions and decisions. People who had known our family for decades were asking questions about succession plans and expressing confusion about why the fourth generation wasn't being prepared to take over the family business. The uncertainty was also affecting company morale and long-term planning, as key employees and clients wondered about Morrison Construction's future leadership and stability. Several longtime managers had approached me privately to express concern about the lack of clear succession planning and the potential impact on their own careers and retirement security. But what none of them knew was that I had been quietly preparing for the possibility that Dad's hostility toward family succession might lead to decisions that would threaten the business legacy our family had spent a century building. My legal training had taught me to anticipate worst-case scenarios and prepare contingency plans, and I had been discreetly researching options for protecting Morrison Construction from potentially destructive decisions. The research had revealed vulnerabilities in the company's financial structure that could be exploited to influence or block major decisions like asset sales or ownership transfers. Morrison Construction carried significant debt for equipment, real estate, and operational financing that created leverage points for anyone with the resources and knowledge to acquire those obligations. More importantly, I had been building relationships with the lenders, suppliers, and creditors who held those debts, positioning myself to potentially acquire controlling interests in Morrison Construction's financial obligations if circumstances required such drastic action. I had hoped those preparations would never be necessary, that Dad would eventually recognize our qualifications and include us in succession planning that honored both his legacy and our family's future. But as Thanksgiving approached, his comments and behavior suggested that he was preparing to make unilateral decisions about the company's future that could destroy everything our family had built together. Thanksgiving dinner at the Morrison family home had always been a celebration of gratitude, family unity, and shared appreciation for the blessings we had built together over 4 generations. The dining room table was decorated with photos from company milestones, family achievements, and community projects that Morrison Construction had completed over the decades. My parents, siblings, their spouses, and several grandchildren gathered around that table as we had every year, sharing stories about family history, discussing current projects, and expressing gratitude for the prosperity and stability the family business had provided for all of us. But this year's gathering had an undercurrent of tension that everyone could feel but no one directly addressed. Dad seemed unusually quiet during the early part of the meal, responding to conversation with short answers and distracted attention that suggested his mind was elsewhere. Mom kept giving him concerned glances, apparently aware that he had something on his mind but uncertain about what he was planning to share with the family. My brothers and their wives exchanged worried looks, clearly sensing that something significant was coming but unsure how to address the obvious tension. The grandchildren, ranging in age from 5 to 15, picked up on the adult anxiety and began behaving more quietly than usual, as if they understood instinctively that this family gathering was different from previous celebrations. After we had finished the main course and were preparing for dessert, Dad stood up and tapped his wine glass to get everyone's attention, a gesture that had traditionally signaled heartfelt toasts about family gratitude and shared accomplishments. "I have an announcement to make that affects the entire family," he began, his tone carrying a formality that immediately put everyone on alert. "As you all know, Morrison Construction has been in our family for 4 generations, and it's provided well for all of us over the past century. But after a lot of thought and consultation with advisors, I've decided that it's time to sell the company." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time while everyone processed what he had just announced. "Dad, what do you mean, sell the company?" Michael asked, his voice showing the shock we were all feeling. "I mean, I'm selling Morrison Construction to Hartwell Development Group, a larger construction firm that's interested in acquiring our client base, reputation, and operational assets. The deal will be finalized within the next 60 days. The information was delivered matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing routine business decisions rather than announcing the end of a century-old family legacy that had defined our identity and provided for multiple generations. "But Dad," Daniel said, "what about succession planning? What about the family's future involvement in the business? What about all the employees who have worked for us for decades?" Dad's response was even more shocking than his initial announcement. "I've concluded that none of you are qualified or committed enough to successfully run Morrison Construction. You've all pursued your own interests and careers without demonstrating the dedication and sacrifice that building this business required." The accusation was breathtaking in its unfairness and inaccuracy. All 3 of us had specifically chosen educational paths and career experiences designed to prepare us for eventual roles in the family business. We had made significant personal and professional sacrifices to position ourselves to contribute meaningfully to Morrison Construction's future. "That's not true, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the anger and hurt building inside me. "We've all been preparing our entire adult lives to contribute to the family business. We've earned relevant degrees, gained industry experience, and demonstrated our commitment to continuing what great-grandfather started. Victoria, you've spent your career working for corporate law firms, making money off other people's businesses instead of building anything yourself. Michael, you bounced around between different companies instead of showing loyalty to Morrison Construction. Daniel, you've been working on government projects instead of focusing on the family business." His characterization of our career choices was so distorted and unfair that it revealed fundamental misunderstanding or deliberate misrepresentation of our motivations and achievements. We had all made strategic decisions about education and experience that were designed to benefit Morrison Construction, not to avoid or abandon family obligations. "The truth is," Dad continued, "none of you have shown the hunger, the commitment, or the business instincts necessary to take Morrison Construction to the next level. You've all been waiting for inheritance instead of earning leadership roles through performance and dedication." The lecture about earning leadership roles was particularly infuriating because he had never offered us opportunities to demonstrate our capabilities within Morrison Construction. We had been excluded from strategic planning, operational management, and business development decisions that would have allowed us to prove our qualifications and commitment. "What about the employees?" Michael asked. "What about the families who have depended on Morrison Construction for generations? What about the legacy that great-grandfather and grandfather built? The new owners will honor existing employment commitments and maintain the Morrison Construction brand," Dad replied. "The legacy will continue under more capable management than I could provide by turning the business over to children who see it as an entitlement rather than a responsibility." The conversation continued for another painful hour, during which Dad systematically dismissed every argument we made about family legacy, employee loyalty, community responsibility, and our own qualifications to continue the business our ancestors had built. He had clearly made his decision months earlier and had been planning this announcement as a way to justify selling the company without family input or consideration of our interests in preserving the Morrison Construction legacy. But what Dad didn't know was that his announcement had just triggered the implementation of contingency plans I had been developing for exactly this scenario. His decision to sell Morrison Construction to outsiders rather than involve his own children in succession planning was going to meet resistance he had never anticipated from a daughter he had apparently underestimated completely. As the family dispersed that evening in shock and disappointment, I was already making phone calls to financial contacts who had been waiting for my signal to begin acquiring Morrison Construction's outstanding debts and contractual obligations. The family business Dad thought he could sell to spite his children was about to become the subject of a corporate strategy that would demonstrate exactly how much those unqualified children had learned about business, law, and strategic planning during their supposedly irrelevant career development. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, while my family was still reeling from Dad's announcement about selling Morrison Construction, I was implementing a carefully planned strategy that would give me the leverage necessary to protect our family's legacy from his spiteful decision. The key to my plan was understanding something Dad had apparently forgotten in his rush to punish his children for their perceived shortcomings. Morrison Construction, like most construction companies, operated with significant debt financing for equipment, real estate, operational costs, and project funding. Those debts created leverage points that could be used to influence or even control major business decisions like asset sales. My years working in corporate law had taught me that controlling a company's debt was often more powerful than owning equity, especially when that debt included restrictive covenants, cross-default provisions, and change-of-control clauses that could be triggered by ownership transfers or major corporate transactions. I had spent the past 6 months quietly researching Morrison Construction's financial structure, identifying the various lenders, suppliers, and creditors who held the company's obligations, and building relationships with the decision-makers at those institutions who controlled the terms and conditions of our family business's debt financing. The research had revealed that Morrison Construction carried approximately $12 million in various forms of debt. Equipment financing for heavy machinery and vehicles, commercial real estate mortgages for our headquarters and equipment yards, working capital lines of credit for operational expenses, and performance bonds for ongoing construction projects. More importantly, I discovered that much of this debt included provisions that would be triggered by changes in company ownership or control, requiring immediate renegotiation of terms, acceleration of payment schedules, or outright repayment of outstanding balances. These provisions had been included by lenders to protect their interests in case Morrison Construction was acquired by companies with different credit profiles, management capabilities, or strategic priorities. The lenders wanted assurance that any new owners would be as reliable and capable as the Morrison family had proven to be over decades of successful business operations. But Dad had apparently not considered these debt provisions when planning his sale to Hartwell Development Group, or he had assumed they could be easily resolved through routine corporate negotiations. His failure to account for the financing complexities would create opportunities for someone with the knowledge and resources to acquire controlling interests in Morrison Construction's debt obligations. I began the acquisition process by approaching Bank of America, which held the largest portion of Morrison Construction's debt through commercial real estate mortgages and equipment financing totaling approximately $4 million. My relationship with their commercial lending division, developed through my corporate law practice, gave me credibility and access that allowed me to propose a transaction that would benefit both the bank and my strategic objectives. Ms. Morrison, the senior loan officer explained during our confidential meeting, we've been concerned about the potential sale of Morrison Construction because Hartwell Development Group doesn't have the same track record of reliability and community commitment that your family has demonstrated over the past century. That's exactly why I'm here, I replied. I want to acquire Bank of America's position in Morrison Construction's debt obligations, taking over all the rights and remedies associated with those loans while maintaining the same terms and conditions that have worked successfully for everyone involved. The bank was surprisingly receptive to the proposal because it eliminated their risk exposure to Hartwell Development Group while maintaining their relationship with the Morrison family through my personal guarantee of the debt obligations. From their perspective, they were trading exposure to an unknown corporate entity for continued relationship with a family member who had demonstrated professional competence and financial responsibility. The transaction was structured as a debt assignment, with me purchasing Bank of America's position for a modest premium over the outstanding balance while assuming all the rights and obligations associated with the original loan agreements. This gave me the same legal authority over Morrison Construction's operations that the bank had previously held, including the right to accelerate payment, modify terms, or block transactions that violated debt covenants. Similar transactions with other lenders followed over the next several weeks. The equipment financing company was happy to assign their position to someone with legal expertise and family connections to Morrison Construction. The supplier who provided bonding and insurance services saw advantages in working directly with a Morrison family member rather than dealing with corporate bureaucracy at Hartwell Development Group. Within 6 weeks of Dad's Thanksgiving announcement, I had acquired controlling interests in approximately $8 million of Morrison Construction's $12 million debt load. The acquisitions had required significant personal financial investment and leverage, but they positioned me to exercise decisive influence over any proposed sale or ownership transfer. The legal research I conducted during this period revealed that the debt covenants I now controlled included specific provisions that would be triggered by Dad's proposed sale to Hartwell Development Group. Change of control clauses would accelerate payment schedules, cross-default provisions would trigger renegotiation of all related agreements, and personal guarantees would require new collateral or security arrangements. Most significantly, several of the debt agreements included approval rights that would allow me, as the new creditor, to block any proposed sale that I determined would adversely affect the collateral value or repayment prospects associated with Morrison Construction's assets and operations. But acquiring the debt was only the first phase of my strategy. The second phase involved preparing for the confrontation with Dad that would reveal my leverage position and force him to reconsider his decision to sell the family business to outsiders. I spent weeks working with attorneys and financial advisors to ensure that my debt acquisition strategy was legally sound, financially viable, and strategically positioned to achieve my objective of protecting Morrison Construction from being sold outside the family. The legal documentation was complex but ironclad, establishing my rights as senior creditor while protecting Morrison Construction's operations from any disruption that might result from the change in debt ownership. The financial arrangements ensured that I could meet my obligations to service the debt while maintaining leverage over the company's strategic decisions. Most importantly, I prepared comprehensive business plans and financial projections that demonstrated how Morrison Construction could continue operating successfully under family management while meeting all debt service obligations and maintaining the growth trajectory that had made the company attractive to potential buyers. The plans addressed every concern Dad had raised about his children's qualifications by showing specifically how Michael's operational expertise, Daniel's technical knowledge, and my legal and financial skills could be combined to manage Morrison Construction more effectively than any outside buyer could achieve. As Christmas approached, I was ready to reveal the strategy that would force Dad to confront the reality that his attempt to sell the family business had been blocked by the daughter he had dismissed as unqualified and uncommitted to preserving our family's legacy. Christmas dinner at the Morrison family home was scheduled to be a smaller, more subdued gathering than our usual celebration, reflecting the family tension and uncertainty that had dominated our relationship since Thanksgiving. Dad's announcement about selling Morrison Construction had created an atmosphere of grief and resentment that made traditional holiday joy feel forced and artificial. My brothers and their families were struggling with feelings of betrayal and disappointment about Dad's decision, while also dealing with practical concerns about their own career plans and financial security that had been based on assumptions about eventual involvement in the family business. Mom was caught between supporting Dad's decision and recognizing the pain it had caused her children and grandchildren. She had tried to mediate family discussions about the sale, but Dad's refusal to reconsider or even discuss alternative approaches had made her efforts at reconciliation ineffective. The extended family members who traditionally joined our Christmas celebration had been awkwardly excluded this year, apparently because Dad didn't want to field questions about selling Morrison Construction or explain his decision to people who had known our family for decades and expected the business to remain in Morrison hands. But I had specifically requested that this year's Christmas dinner include not just immediate family but also my Uncle Robert, Dad's brother, Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister, and several family friends who had been part of our holiday celebrations for years. I claimed that I wanted to maintain family traditions despite the business situation, but my real motivation was ensuring that Dad's confrontation with my debt acquisition strategy would have witnesses who could hold him accountable for his response. The dinner conversation was initially focused on safe topics like the grandchildren's school activities, holiday plans, and general family updates that avoided discussing Morrison Construction or Dad's plans for selling the company. But the underlying tension was obvious to everyone present, and it was clear that the business situation needed to be addressed directly. After dessert had been served and the children had been excused to play in the living room, I stood up and addressed the family with an announcement that would change everything. Before we finish our Christmas celebration, I began, I need to share some information about Morrison Construction that affects all of us. Dad immediately looked suspicious, apparently worried that I was going to create a scene or publicly criticize his decision to sell the family business. Victoria, this isn't the time or place for family business discussions, he said firmly. We've already talked about this situation, and my decision is final. Actually, Dad, your decision isn't as final as you think it is, I replied calmly. And this is exactly the right time and place to discuss what's been happening with Morrison Construction over the past month. I pulled out a folder containing legal documents and financial statements that I had prepared specifically for this moment. While you've been planning to sell our family's business to Hartwell Development Group, I've been acquiring the debt obligations that control Morrison Construction's operations and strategic decisions. The silence that followed was profound as everyone processed what I had just announced. I need to pause here because what happened next was absolutely incredible. You're probably thinking you know how my dad reacted when he realized his own daughter had completely outmaneuvered his plan to sell our family business, but his response was even more dramatic than you can imagine. The look of shock when he understood that I now controlled the company he thought he could give away was priceless. Make sure you're subscribed because the way this corporate family showdown played out is absolutely brilliant. What do you mean, acquiring debt obligations? Uncle Robert asked, clearly intrigued by the legal and financial implications of what I was describing. I mean that over the past 6 weeks, I purchased approximately $8 million of Morrison Construction's outstanding debt from various lenders, suppliers, and creditors. I now control the majority of the company's financial obligations, which gives me substantial leverage over any proposed sale or ownership transfer. Dad's face had gone completely pale as he began understanding the implications of what I was saying. Victoria, what have you done? He asked, his voice carrying a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been impressed recognition of the sophistication of my strategy. I protected our family's legacy from being sold to strangers, I replied. The debt agreements I now control include change of control provisions, cross-default clauses, and approval rights that effectively give me veto power over your proposed sale to Hartwell Development Group. I opened the folder and began displaying legal documents that showed the scope and impact of my debt acquisition strategy. Bank of America's commercial real estate mortgages require new owner approval and collateral renegotiation if Morrison Construction changes ownership. The equipment financing agreements include acceleration clauses that would require immediate payment of outstanding balances if the company is sold. The supplier agreements include approval rights that allow creditors to block transactions that might adversely affect collateral value. Dad was staring at the documents as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. How did you finance this? He asked. $8 million isn't something you could just pay out of pocket. I used personal guarantees, leveraged my law firm relationships for credit facilities, and structured the acquisitions as assignments rather than purchases to minimize the immediate cash requirements, I explained. The transactions were complex, but they were all legally sound and financially viable. Michael and Daniel were looking back and forth between Dad and me, apparently beginning to understand that I had been planning this strategy while they had been simply accepting Dad's decision as inevitable. Victoria, Michael said admiringly, this is incredible. You've essentially taken control of Morrison Construction without Dad's knowledge or consent. I protected Morrison Construction from being sold outside the family, I corrected. The company can still operate normally, and Dad can still manage daily operations. But any major strategic decisions like asset sales now require my approval as the controlling creditor. Aunt Patricia, who had worked as a business manager for several companies over her career, was clearly impressed by the sophistication of the strategy. "Victoria, this is some of the most creative corporate maneuvering I've ever seen," she said. "You've used the company's own debt structure to create leverage that gives you more control than equity ownership would provide." Dad was still processing the reality of what had happened, and his response revealed both anger about being outmaneuvered and grudging respect for the business acumen I had demonstrated. "This is corporate warfare, Victoria," he said finally. "You've essentially staged a hostile takeover of your own family's business." "No, Dad," I replied calmly. "I prevented a hostile divestiture of our family's business to people who have no connection to our legacy, our employees, or our community responsibilities." The conversation continued for another 2 hours, during which I presented detailed financial projections showing how Morrison Construction could continue operating successfully under family management while meeting all debt service obligations and maintaining the growth trajectory that had made the company attractive to potential buyers. The hours following my Christmas revelation were filled with heated discussions, legal consultations, and family negotiations that would determine the future of Morrison Construction and reshape our family relationships permanently. Dad spent most of the evening on the phone with his attorneys, trying to understand the legal implications of my debt acquisition strategy and explore options for proceeding with his planned sale to Hartwell Development Group. What his lawyers told him was both sobering and decisive. My control over Morrison Construction's debt obligations gave me effective veto power over any proposed sale, merger, or significant asset transfer. The change of control provisions, cross-default clauses, and approval rights embedded in the debt agreements I had acquired created legal barriers that would be expensive and time-consuming to overcome, if they could be overcome at all. The debt covenants Ms. Morrison now controls our standard commercial lending provisions designed to protect creditor interests, Dad's attorney explained during a conference call that included the entire family. Any proposed sale to Hartwell Development Group would trigger multiple covenant violations that could result in acceleration of payment obligations, termination of credit facilities, and potential foreclosure proceedings. The legal reality was stark. Morrison Construction could not be sold to Hartwell Development Group or any other outside buyer without my consent as the controlling creditor. Dad's plan to dispose of the family business to spite his children had been effectively blocked by a daughter he had dismissed as unqualified and uncommitted. But more importantly, my debt acquisition strategy had created an opportunity to demonstrate exactly how qualified and committed his children actually were to preserving and operating the family business. The comprehensive business plans I had prepared during the debt acquisition process showed specifically how Michael's operational expertise, Daniel's technical knowledge, and my legal and financial skills could be combined to manage Morrison Construction more effectively than any outside buyer could achieve. "Dad," I said during our family conference call with the attorneys, "this isn't about punishing you for your decision or proving that you were wrong about our capabilities. This is about protecting something that took 4 generations to build and ensuring that Morrison Construction continues to serve our employees, our community, and our family's legacy." Michael added his perspective. "We've all invested years of our lives preparing to contribute to this business. Victoria's strategy has created an opportunity for us to prove that your doubts about our qualifications were unfounded." Daniel agreed. "The technical innovation and operational efficiency improvements we've been discussing for years can finally be implemented if we're working together instead of being excluded from strategic planning and business development." The conversation revealed that Dad's hostility toward our involvement in Morrison Construction had been based more on his fears about losing control and relevance than on legitimate concerns about our qualifications or commitment. He had been using our perceived shortcomings as excuses to avoid confronting his own anxieties about succession planning and retirement. But my debt acquisition strategy had forced him to confront the reality that his children possessed business skills and strategic thinking capabilities that exceeded his own in many areas. The legal and financial sophistication required to execute such a complex corporate maneuver demonstrated exactly the kind of business acumen that would be valuable for Morrison Construction's future success. "Victoria," Dad admitted during one of our private conversations, "I have to say, I'm impressed by what you've accomplished. The debt acquisition strategy you implemented is more sophisticated than anything I could have developed myself. His acknowledgement was both gratifying and sad, representing recognition of my capabilities that had come only after I was forced to use those capabilities against him to protect our family's legacy. Dad, all three of us have been developing skills and expertise that could benefit Morrison Construction, I replied. But you've been so focused on maintaining control that you haven't given us opportunities to demonstrate what we could contribute to the business. The negotiations that followed over the next several weeks were complex and emotionally charged, involving not just family dynamics but also legal requirements, financial obligations, and operational considerations that would affect hundreds of employees and dozens of ongoing construction projects. The ultimate resolution required Dad to acknowledge that his decision to sell Morrison Construction had been motivated more by personal feelings than by business considerations, and that his children's qualifications for continuing the family business were significantly stronger than he had been willing to admit. In exchange for my agreement to modify the debt terms in ways that would allow normal business operations to continue, Dad agreed to establish a formal succession plan that would gradually transfer operational and strategic control of Morrison Construction to the next generation over a 5-year timeline. The succession plan addressed Dad's concerns about maintaining his role and relevance while also creating clear pathways for Michael, Daniel, and me to assume increasing responsibilities based on our respective expertise and contributions to the company's success. Michael would become Chief Operating Officer with responsibility for project management, client relationships, and daily operational oversight. Daniel would serve as Chief Technical Officer, leading innovation initiatives, engineering solutions, and technical training programs. I would assume the role of Chief Financial Officer and General Counsel, handling legal compliance, financial strategy, and corporate development. Dad would remain as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer for 3 years, providing mentorship and strategic oversight while gradually transferring decision-making authority to his children. After the 3-year transition period, he would move to an advisory role that maintained his connection to the business while allowing the next generation to implement their vision for Morrison Construction's future. The arrangement preserved Dad's dignity and continued involvement while also addressing the succession concerns that had motivated his original decision to sell the company. More importantly, it created opportunities for our family to work together in ways that utilized everyone's strengths while honoring the legacy our ancestors had built. But the most significant outcome of the debt acquisition strategy was the demonstration that Dad's children possessed exactly the kind of business intelligence, strategic thinking, and family loyalty that Morrison Construction needed for continued success. The crisis had forced him to recognize capabilities he had been ignoring and to acknowledge that his fears about our qualifications were unfounded. The 18 months following our Christmas confrontation marked a period of remarkable transformation for both Morrison Construction and our family relationships. The succession plan we had negotiated created opportunities for all of us to contribute our expertise to the business while working through the trust issues and communication problems that had been building for years. Dad's gradual transition from controlling owner to collaborative leader was challenging for everyone involved, but it ultimately demonstrated that his concerns about losing relevance were unfounded. His decades of industry experience, client relationships, and operational knowledge remained valuable to Morrison Construction's success, but now his wisdom was being combined with fresh perspectives and modern business approaches that strengthened the company's competitive position. Michael's role as Chief Operating Officer had immediate positive impacts on project efficiency, client satisfaction, and employee morale. His MBA training and experience with other construction companies brought best practices and operational innovations that Dad had been resistant to implementing when he was making decisions independently. Michael's systematic approach to project management has reduced our completion times by an average of 15% while improving quality control and client communication, Dad admitted during one of our quarterly family business meetings. I was wrong to assume that his experience with other companies meant he wasn't committed to Morrison Construction's success. Daniel's technical leadership had been equally transformative, introducing construction technologies, safety innovations, and environmental compliance practices that positioned Morrison Construction as a leader in sustainable building practices and technical excellence. Daniel's engineering background has opened opportunities for us to bid on projects that were previously beyond our technical capabilities, Dad acknowledged. The hospital expansion project we completed last quarter wouldn't have been possible without his expertise in complex structural engineering and environmental systems. My role as CFO and General Counsel had created efficiencies and strategic advantages that had immediate impacts on profitability, risk management, and long-term planning. The legal and financial expertise I had developed during my corporate law career translated directly into cost savings, contract improvements, and regulatory compliance that strengthened Morrison Construction's competitive position. Victoria's debt acquisition strategy taught me that my children have business skills I hadn't recognized or appreciated, Dad told a reporter from Construction Industry Weekly who was writing an article about family business succession planning. Her ability to see financial leverage opportunities and execute complex corporate transactions demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking Morrison Construction needed for future growth. But the most important transformation was in our family relationships and communication patterns. The crisis created by Dad's decision to sell the business had forced all of us to be more honest about our feelings, expectations, and concerns regarding the family business and our roles within it. Family business meetings became forums for collaborative problem-solving rather than lectures about Dad's expectations and our shortcomings. Strategic planning sessions included input from all family members, with decisions made based on collective wisdom rather than paternal authority. I realize now that my fears about losing control were preventing me from recognizing the value of collaboration, Dad reflected during one of our family dinners. I was so focused on protecting what I had built that I was missing opportunities to build something even better with my children's help. The financial results of our collaborative approach were impressive and validated Dad's decision to embrace succession planning rather than proceed with selling the company. Morrison Construction's revenue increased by 30% in our first year of family management, with profit margins improving due to operational efficiencies and strategic innovations that none of us could have implemented independently. More importantly, employee satisfaction and retention reached record levels as workers recognized the stability and commitment to family values that characterized our approach to business management. Many longtime employees expressed relief that Morrison Construction would remain a family business with personal connections to the community rather than becoming part of a corporate conglomerate. Working for the Morrison family has always meant something more than just having a job, said Carl Peterson, a project foreman who had worked for Morrison Construction for 28 years. Knowing that the next generation is taking over instead of the company being sold to strangers gives us confidence about our own futures and the future of the company we've helped build. The community response to our family business continuity was equally positive, with clients, suppliers, and civic leaders expressing appreciation that Morrison Construction would maintain its local connections and commitment to regional development rather than being absorbed by an outside corporation. Morrison Construction has been building this community for over a century, said Mayor Jennifer Walsh during the Chamber of Commerce dinner where our family received recognition for business continuity and community commitment. Having the fourth generation of Morrisons continue that legacy means our local construction projects will continue to reflect the quality, integrity, and community values that have always characterized their work. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of our business transformation was the recognition that Dad's initial concerns about our readiness for leadership had been largely unfounded, while his underlying commitment to family and legacy had been stronger than his fears and frustrations had suggested. The debt acquisition strategy that had initially seemed like corporate warfare had actually created opportunities for family healing and business growth that benefited everyone involved. Dad regained confidence in his children's capabilities and commitment, while we gained appreciation for the wisdom and experience he brought to strategic decisions and client relationships. Looking back on that Christmas dinner when Victoria revealed her debt acquisition strategy, Dad told the Construction Industry Weekly reporter, "I realize it was the best thing that could have happened to our family and our business. She forced me to confront my own insecurities and recognize that my children were more qualified to continue Morrison Construction than I had been willing to admit." The success of our collaborative approach attracted attention from other family businesses struggling with succession planning issues. We began receiving invitations to speak at conferences about strategies for managing generational transitions while preserving family values and business continuity. The Morrison family's approach to succession planning demonstrates that family business conflicts can become opportunities for growth and innovation when everyone is committed to preserving legacy while embracing change, said Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a professor of family business management who studied our transition for a case study she published in Harvard Business Review. The recognition was gratifying, but more important was the internal family satisfaction we experienced from working together effectively and building on what our ancestors had created while adding our own contributions to Morrison Construction's legacy. My brothers and I had proven that our education, experience, and commitment were exactly what Morrison Construction needed for continued success in an increasingly competitive and complex business environment. Dad had demonstrated that his experience and relationships remained valuable assets that enhanced rather than conflicted with our modern business approaches. Most significantly, we had preserved a century-old family legacy while adapting it to contemporary realities in ways that honored both our past and our future. Morrison Construction remained a family business with deep community roots and personal commitment to quality and integrity, but it was also a modern company with innovative approaches to construction technology, environmental responsibility, and strategic planning. The debt acquisition strategy that had begun as a desperate attempt to prevent the sale of our family business had evolved into a comprehensive business transformation that positioned Morrison Construction for continued success while strengthening family relationships and preserving community connections. 3 years after that devastating Thanksgiving announcement when Dad declared that none of his children were worthy of inheriting the family business, Morrison Construction was more successful, more profitable, and more respected than it had ever been in its century-long history. The fourth generation of Morrisons was proving that we were not only worthy of the legacy our ancestors had built, but capable of expanding and improving it in ways that would benefit the fifth generation and beyond. 5 years after that catastrophic Thanksgiving dinner when Dad announced he was selling our family business because we were unworthy of the legacy, Morrison Construction had become the most successful and respected construction firm in our region's history. The collaborative leadership model we had developed through our succession planning had created innovations and efficiencies that positioned us as industry leaders while maintaining the family values and community commitment that had always defined our company. The financial metrics were impressive. Revenue had increased by 75% since the family transition began, profit margins had improved significantly due to operational innovations and strategic planning, and employee retention had reached record levels as workers recognized the stability and growth opportunities that came with genuine family commitment to the business. But the numbers only told part of the story. Morrison Construction had become a model for other family businesses seeking to balance tradition with innovation, demonstrating that multi-generational collaboration could create competitive advantages that no individual leadership could achieve. Michael's operational management had transformed project delivery timelines and quality standards, earning Morrison Construction recognition as the preferred contractor for major institutional and commercial projects throughout the tri-state area. Daniel's technical leadership had positioned us at the forefront of sustainable construction practices and advanced building technologies, opening new market segments and commanding premium pricing for specialized services. My legal and financial expertise had created strategic advantages in contract negotiation, risk management, and corporate development that strengthened our competitive position while protecting the company from the economic uncertainties that had challenged many construction firms during the same period. The integration of next-generation skills with established experience has made Morrison Construction more capable and more profitable than we ever imagined possible, Dad told the audience at the National Family Business Association conference where he was presenting our case study as an example of successful succession planning. Dad's role had evolved into that of executive chairman and senior advisor, providing strategic guidance and client relationship management while allowing operational and financial decisions to be made by the next generation based on our collaborative assessment of business opportunities and challenges. The arrangement had preserved his dignity and continued relevance while creating space for innovation and growth that his individual leadership style had been limiting. More importantly, it had repaired family relationships that had been damaged by years of mutual misunderstanding about capabilities, commitment, and contribution to the family business. I spent too many years focusing on what I thought my children lacked instead of recognizing what they could contribute, Dad admitted during a family dinner celebrating Morrison Construction's selection as the region's Business of the Year. Victoria's debt acquisition strategy taught me that my children had developed business skills that complemented and exceeded my own in many areas. The recognition was gratifying, but the most satisfying aspect of our business success was the knowledge that we had preserved a century-old family legacy while adapting it to contemporary realities that would ensure its continuation for future generations. Tyler Morrison, Michael's 15-year-old son, had begun spending summers working on construction sites and expressing genuine interest in eventually joining the family business after completing his education. Sarah Morrison, Daniel's 12-year-old daughter, showed remarkable aptitude for the technical and engineering aspects of construction that suggested she might follow her father's path into the business. My own children, ages 8 and 10, were still too young to express preferences about career directions, but they had grown up hearing family stories about great-great-grandfather Thomas and understanding that Morrison Construction represented something special that was worth preserving and continuing. The fifth generation is already showing interest and aptitude for continuing what we've built, I observed during our annual family business planning retreat. But more importantly, they're growing up in an environment where family business participation is seen as an opportunity rather than an obligation, and where collaboration is valued more than control. The contrast with Dad's approach to succession planning was stark and enlightening. Instead of excluding the next generation from business discussions while questioning their qualifications, we were including our children in age-appropriate ways while helping them understand the values and principles that had made Morrison Construction successful across 4 generations. The debt acquisition strategy that had initially seemed like an act of corporate rebellion had actually become the foundation for a family business model that balanced individual strengths with collective wisdom, traditional values with innovative approaches, and family legacy with community responsibility. Victoria's strategy wasn't just about preventing the sale of Morrison Construction, Michael reflected during an interview for a documentary about family business succession. It was about forcing our family to have honest conversations about our capabilities, our commitment, and our vision for the future. Daniel agreed, the crisis created opportunities for all of us to demonstrate what we could contribute to the family business while working through the trust and communication issues that had been building for years. Looking back on this incredible journey from family betrayal to business triumph, I realized that Dad's Thanksgiving announcement was actually the catalyst for the best thing that ever happened to our family and our company. His attempt to punish us for being unworthy forced me to prove exactly how worthy we actually were. And the debt acquisition strategy that saved our legacy also created the collaborative leadership model that made us more successful than we'd ever been. Have you ever had family members underestimate your abilities or try to exclude you from something you'd worked your whole life to be part of? How did you handle being told you weren't qualified for opportunities you'd been preparing for your entire career? I'd love to hear your stories about proving doubters wrong and protecting family legacies from destructive decisions. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I share more stories about family business dynamics, corporate strategy, and the ways legal and financial expertise can be used to protect what matters most. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any new videos, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that underestimating someone's business skills can lead to very expensive lessons in corporate strategy. Thank you for watching and for all the incredible support you show by engaging with these videos. Remember that being excluded from family opportunities doesn't mean you're unqualified, sometimes it just means you need to create your own opportunities to demonstrate your capabilities. And sometimes the best revenge against people who doubt your business skills is simply showing them exactly how sophisticated those skills actually are. Take care of yourselves, trust your abilities even when family members don't. And remember that protecting what you love sometimes requires using every skill you've developed to outmaneuver people who are trying to destroy it. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep building the legacy you want to leave for the next generation.